What if one of Formula One's biggest manufacturers quietly admitted that its entire championship project wasn't ready? That's exactly the situation Aston Martin now finds itself in after Honda finally acknowledged that its 2026 power unit has not lived up to expectations. For months, fans believed Aston Martin would become one of the biggest success stories of Formula One's new era. The team had secured Adrian Newey, one of the greatest designers in F1 history. Fernando Alonso had committed to the long-term project because he believed this was finally his chance to fight for another world championship. Honda had returned as a full works partner with enormous confidence, promising to build a power unit capable of taking Aston Martin to the very top. Everything looked perfect on paper, and many experts even predicted that Aston Martin could become the biggest threat to Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull under the new regulations. But as the first races of the 2026 season unfolded, something became painfully obvious. Aston Martin wasn't fighting for victories. Instead, the team was fighting its own car. Reliability problems began appearing almost immediately. The power unit failed to deliver the performance engineers expected, and reports from inside the paddock suggested that vibration issues were affecting several critical components. Rather than spending race weekends developing new upgrades and improving lap times, engineers were forced to focus on solving technical problems just to keep the car running consistently. Every lost practice session meant less valuable data. Every reliability issue delayed development. Every weekend became another setback in a season that was supposed to mark the beginning of Aston Martin's championship era. Then came the moment that surprised almost everyone in Formula One. Honda openly admitted that it was not satisfied with the performance of its own power unit. Manufacturers almost never make statements like this because such admissions immediately create pressure from fans, the media, and rival teams. Yet Honda chose honesty over excuses. According to the company, the engine simply wasn't delivering the level of competitiveness it had targeted before the season began. That single admission instantly changed the conversation across the paddock. Suddenly, Aston Martin's disappointing performances made much more sense. Instead of blaming the drivers or questioning Adrian Newey's influence, attention shifted directly to the heart of the car, the power unit itself. But how did this happen? Honda is one of the most successful engine manufacturers in Formula One history. The company helped power Max Verstappen and Red Bull to multiple championships and built a reputation for producing some of the strongest hybrid engines on the grid. So why would a manufacturer with that level of experience suddenly struggle under the new regulations? The answer lies in just how dramatically Formula One changed for 2026. The new rules introduced major changes to the balance between the internal combustion engine and the electrical systems. Teams had to redesign almost every aspect of their power units while also adapting to new sustainability requirements and different energy deployment strategies. Every manufacturer started from a clean sheet of paper, and even the smallest engineering mistake could cost tenths of a second per lap. In modern Formula One, losing just 2 or 3 tenths is often the difference between fighting for victory and struggling to score points. That is why Honda's admission was so significant. It wasn't simply saying the engine needed improvement. It was admitting that one of the most important projects in modern Formula One still required major development. For Aston Martin, this created a serious chain reaction. When an engine isn't performing properly, every other part of the car is affected. Aerodynamic testing becomes less accurate because engineers can't fully trust the data they're collecting. Drivers have to change their driving style to protect reliability. Race strategies become more conservative because the team cannot risk pushing the power unit to its absolute limit. Even simple setup decisions become more complicated because nobody knows whether poor performance is coming from the chassis or the engine. That uncertainty is one of the worst situations any Formula One team can face. While rivals focus on finding extra speed, Aston Martin has been forced to spend valuable time understanding basic performance issues. For a team with championship ambitions, that's an incredibly frustrating position to be in. Yet despite all these setbacks, the people inside Aston Martin remain surprisingly calm. Team officials continue insisting that this project is still in its early stages and that long-term success was always the main objective. Adrian Newey reportedly remains heavily involved in improving the overall package, while Honda engineers are working around the clock to solve the weaknesses that have limited performance so far. The biggest question now is whether those solutions will arrive quickly enough to save the season, or whether Aston Martin will be forced to shift its attention toward the future before the championship battle is already out of reach. As Aston Martin searched for answers, attention quickly turned toward the man many fans believed could solve any Formula One problem, Adrian Newey. When Newey agreed to join Aston Martin, it sent shockwaves through the paddock because he wasn't just another designer. He was the mastermind behind multiple championship-winning cars and the engineer responsible for some of the most dominant machines Formula One has ever seen. Many supporters assumed that once Newey arrived, Aston Martin would instantly become a title contender. But Formula One simply doesn't work that way. Even the greatest designer in the sport cannot magically transform an entire project overnight, especially when the biggest limitation isn't the aerodynamics but the power unit hidden beneath the bodywork. According to reports from inside the paddock, Newey immediately began evaluating every aspect of the AMR26 project, working closely with engineers to understand whether the team's disappointing pace was coming from the chassis, the suspension, the cooling package, or the Honda engine itself. What made the situation even more complicated was the fact that modern Formula One cars are built around the power unit. Every cooling inlet, every aerodynamic surface, every side pod shape, and every packaging decision depends on the engine size, temperature, and performance characteristics. If the power unit isn't performing exactly as expected, the entire car can lose efficiency. That meant Aston Martin wasn't simply trying to make the engine faster. They had to understand how the engine was affecting every other performance area. While engineers worked behind closed doors, Fernando Alonso continued trying to keep the project alive on the track. At 45 years old, Alonso remains one of Formula One's most experienced drivers, and his technical feedback is considered among the best in the sport. After every practice session and every race weekend, he spent hours inside the engineering room discussing the car's behavior, explaining where it was losing performance and helping the team identify weaknesses. Despite his frustration, Alonso refused to publicly criticize either Honda or Aston Martin. Instead, he repeatedly reminded the media that championship projects take time and that patience would be essential under Formula One's completely new regulations. However, body language often tells a different story. Fans noticed several races where Alonso climbed out of the car looking disappointed after another difficult weekend. There were moments when Aston Martin simply lacked the straight-line speed to challenge rivals, while on other circuits the car struggled with energy deployment during long runs. Every race revealed a different weakness, making it difficult for engineers to focus on a single solution. The pressure increased because Aston Martin had invested hundreds of millions of dollars into becoming a championship-winning team. Lawrence Stroll had built a state-of-the-art factory, hired world-class engineers, secured Adrian Newey, and partnered with Honda because he believed 2026 would be the beginning of a new era. Expectations inside the paddock were enormous. Some analysts even predicted Aston Martin could become Formula One's next dominant force. Instead, the opening months of the season forced everyone to lower those expectations. Yet while critics focused on the disappointing results, there were also encouraging signs hidden beneath the surface. Engineers reportedly began understanding the causes of several reliability issues much better than they had during pre-season testing. Small upgrades introduced over consecutive race weekends gradually improved stability, while software updates helped optimize the hybrid system's energy deployment. None of these changes immediately transformed Aston Martin into race winners, but they proved that progress was finally being made. Honda also refused to panic. Company executives admitted that the current performance level wasn't acceptable, but they emphasized that development never stops in Formula One. New engine components were already being prepared, simulation data continued improving, and engineers remained confident that the gap could be reduced as the season progressed. That confidence became even more important because rivals weren't standing still either. Mercedes continued refining its package almost every race weekend. Ferrari introduced aerodynamic upgrades to improve overall balance, while Red Bull once again demonstrated why it remains one of the strongest development teams in Formula One. Every point Aston Martin lost early in the season made its recovery challenge even more difficult. The championship battle waits for nobody. Every weekend you spend solving reliability issues is another weekend your competitors spend becoming faster. That's why many insiders believe the next few races could define Aston Martin's entire 2026 campaign. If Honda's planned upgrades deliver the expected gains, the team could still fight regularly near the front and rebuild momentum heading into the second half of the season. But if those upgrades fail to solve the core problems, Aston Martin may be forced to accept that this season has become a learning year rather than a championship challenge. Even then, the project wouldn't necessarily be a failure. Formula One history is full of teams that struggled during the first year of a major regulation change before becoming dominant later. Mercedes experienced difficult moments before building one of the greatest dynasties the sport has ever seen. Red Bull also required years of development before becoming the benchmark. Aston Martin hopes its story will follow a similar path. The difference is that modern Formula One moves faster than ever before. Fans expect immediate success, sponsors demand results, and every disappointing weekend creates even more pressure from the outside. That is exactly why Honda's public admission carried so much weight. It wasn't just an acknowledgement of current problems, it was a promise that the company understood the challenge and was prepared to fight back. Now the